the money that's been taken out of Caring for Our Country, which is now going to be National Landcare Program, as I understand it from, I think, answers from Mr Sullivan before, there's $1.73 million left that's not been allocated under the environment part of the Landcare Program. Is that a correct understanding?
No, it's 173 million, Senator.
Oh, I said 5. I have written down here 173. I beg your pardon. 175. That's correct?
It's 173.9.
173.9.
0.9.
Thank you. Given that, can you tell us what the process is from here? In the past, you do business plans and things like that. Is that still the intent?
Senator, that's a matter in terms of now that there is a decision on the budget in terms of the National Landcare Program, we anticipate that ministers, that's Minister Joyce and Minister Hunt, will need to provide some certainty around the settings before we go into a public consultation phase.
Certainty about what, sorry?
In terms of, now that we have a budget decision, in terms of what's left in the National Landcare Program, there'll have to be a decision around prioritising going forward. And I don't have any sense, Senator, I'm not going to predict an outcome there of whether that would involve a business plan or an outline of expenditure and what form that will take. In part, that's a decision for ministers to take. We do anticipate, though, that that will be resolved reasonably quickly in terms of the program settings, and so that we will be into active consultation in weeks.
And so we're talking about consultation over the priorities or the process, and with whom?
So I think it'll be consultation around the broader objectives for the National Landcare Program, the priorities, meeting the election commitment of putting Landcare more at the centre in terms of Landcare groups more at the centre of delivery.
While you're answering this one, could I just ask a clarification? When you're talking about the Landcare Program, are you talking about across the board Landcare Program, not just the environment side, not just your side of it?
I'm talking about the broader National Landcare Program, so both environment appropriations and agriculture appropriations and the joint management around regional funding. I think the third part of your question was who will we be consulting? That would involve non-government organisations, the community, the NRM organisations and state governments.
Okay. Is it so? Do I take it from that it'll be an invite consultation process rather than a broad call for comments?
Look, I can't. That absolute detail in terms of the public consultation process, but I envisage that would be, we already have an array of known stakeholders and parts of the community. We'll have to check those in terms of whether that's open public meetings or invitation. That'll be a matter in terms of settling the consultation process. I think that will also inevitably mean not just in capitals, not just in capital cities, but and it's obviously difficult then to have outreach into all communities, but we will attempt to get outreach into major regional centres as well.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the timeline for that, you said you expect the consultation process to start shortly?
Yeah.
Have you got a date set yet for, and I take on board what you said about the business plan, for when you expect that applications, another round, would start? Have you got a predicted date that you're aiming for?
I think, again, that's a matter for ministers to decide in absolute terms, Senator, but there will need to be certainty around future funding allocations to provide regions with certainty well before December of this calendar year.
Yes, so it is anticipated that in this first half of the new financial year, decisions, judging from what you've just said, decisions will be made in terms of those allocations.
That's right. That's my understanding, and I think that's the intention. But again, that will be subject to ministers agreeing that. I think there is an appetite for that to be done as quickly as possible, Senator.
Thank you. And can I just clarify, now that the programs have been split, all in the National Landcare program, but they've been split, and you said the board, I presumed when you talked about Minister Hunt and Minister Joyce that you're talking about the board, and given that they've now been split and they're back to their respective portfolios, does Minister Joyce now just make decisions under the Landcare program and Minister Hunt under Environment, or does the board still make?
If I go back to what comprises the National Landcare program, so from an appropriation sense, there's the Natural Resource Management Trust, which is part of the Landcare program, but decisions on that program are a matter solely for Minister Joyce.
Yep.
Under the Environmental Stewardship program, that appropriation is to Minister Hunt and to the Environment Department, and decisions under that program are a matter solely for Minister Hunt. In terms of the Natural Heritage Trust, there are requirements under the NHT board to make funding allocations in terms of agreement from the board.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the process for the Landcare program, and I know I've got to go and ask questions in there, and for the environment component of the program, are you still going to be rolling those programs out together in terms of timing, things like that?
In terms of the joint component of that, definitely would be the intention would be to roll out the joint components together.
Okay, thank you.
And part of that is also that's an intention for that to be to cradle to grave in terms of joint application processes and streamlined joint administration, as well as joint reporting through the single online tool.
Which we were talking about earlier. In terms of, thank you, sorry, I had a train of thought there that you triggered. In terms of ongoing organisations that have ongoing grants, am I correct in my understanding they're not affected by this cut in funding?
In terms of ongoing, I assume that you're referring to allocations to the Natural Resource Management regional bodies?
And other organisations that have grants that have funding that's going into this financial year.
Sorry, if you're talking about current contracts.
I wanted to come back to the regional groups in a minute.
So all current contracts are being honoured.
Yeah, okay. For the extent of their contracts.
Yeah, and depending, obviously, Senator, some contracts don't meet milestones or can't be completed for whatever reason. But in terms of the current contracted component, which is 513.9 million out of the total environment allocation of 687.8. 513.9 is contracted. Those contracts are being actively managed.
Okay, thank you. In terms of regional groups, can I ask here, or do I go next door tomorrow?
You can ask here, and no doubt that won't stop you from going next door tomorrow.
I will go next door, but sometimes you've said I'm not going to don't handle it here, go next door. So,
if that's an invitation, then perhaps tomorrow.
Yes, you have.
No, I think that was the other way around. I think agriculture used to come.
They used to send, although the last couple we've been coming back. It wasn't a question of them people not being helpful. I'm not accusing them of that. In terms of the regional groups, what's the process from here for those groups? I understand they've got their funding commitment. I think it's guaranteed through the end of this year. That's correct, isn't it?
So there are some groups that only have funding through to December of this year. That includes all of New South Wales and Northern Territory, and that's a circumstance that it's arisen for different reasons. In New South Wales, it was due to the reform process, around local land services board.
Yep.
Those groups were provided with a very early indication of extension of funding. I think immediately following the budget, ministers wrote to those groups extending their funding to December.
Yeah.
And that's to allow that time period, Senator, for the program settings to be fully worked out and then funding allocations being made going forward.
Mm. And so what's happening with the other group, the other states?
There are currently contracts for other regions that are in place, and they run until 17-18.
Okay. So for New South Wales and the NT, they'll then, once these issues are resolved, they will have the same expectation of continuation of funding as the other states?
I think they'll have that expectation. And I should clarify, Senator, it's Northern Territory, New South Wales, Perth, Queensland, Murray-Darling.
Perth, you mean just Perth, don't you?
It's Perth NRM.
Perth
Yeah,
NRM.
that's what I mean.
East Gippsland NRM.
Okay.
Queensland, Murray-Darling and...
East Gippsland.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry, but I just wanted to clarify that it was just the Perth NRM we're talking about there.
Senator, I think it's probably worth saying as well that obviously the reduced budget for the National Landcare program will need to be shared across the broader NRM community, so that's one of the things that the government will need to consider.
Okay, so what does shared across the broader NRM community
Well,
mean?
that will be a matter for the government to consider as it confronts the reduction in the program.
So, in other words, and I'm not trying to verbal you,
No,
but
sorry.
what I take from that you're saying is that the NRM groups will be included in that when you make those comments?
The regional component of the funding is a major component of the program, and so
okay.
it has
So,
to be.
although they will have contracts in place, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that their current funding will be maintained. They could potentially, I'm not trying not to verbal you, potentially lose funding during that process of prioritisation.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on that.
Okay.
Senator, sorry.
But the answer there, but the point there is they may not have the current level of funding.
The government will need to consider how the burden is shared.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I understand the
Yeah.
government. Yes,
I don't know whether
all right.
Mr Sullivan wants to add anything.
I think adding on what Mr Thompson just said is that the current contracts that are in place for natural resource management bodies has a 20% drop in 15, 16 and moving forward. So there already is basically a reduction.
But that was done last year.
That was a decision of
was-
the previous government.
Yes, that's right.
That was at the start of the cycle. That
Yeah.
was a decision where funding was left for emerging priorities, and those priorities have emerged.
Yeah, budget cut. Can I go to the Green Army, please? And I know Senator Urquhart started traversing some of these issues, but I wanted to take it a bit further, please. First off, I would like to know, in terms of, you said that there was, Ms Lane, that you were going to be identifying service providers. Can you tell us how you're doing that? Is it...
We're running a tender process at the moment, Senator.
Okay. That's what I presumed you meant, but I just thought I'd better be clear. A tender process. Who determines the tenders?
That decision will be made by the department. So the tenders that have come in are being assessed at the moment, and we would expect within the next month to be making a decision on service providers for the program.
In the next month. And is that for the whole period of the...
That's for 3 years,
3 years?
with an option to extend for a further 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
It's worth noting in that context, Senator, that we're working very closely with the Department of Employment in that tender process. So we're using their tender facilities. We're drawing on their expertise in running those sorts of tenders, large-scale tenders.
Okay.
We have assessors of the tenders now working from both environment and employment on those tenders, and
Okay.
but the department is the final decision maker.
This department?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do have some involvement in employment with on wearing another hat. I'm aware of the the STAR process and the quality assurance processes. Are you taking... Is that being included in this process, looking at the
Not a term I'm
the
familiar with.
performance of some of these providers?
We're using the processes that the Department of Employment does use for their Job Services Australia processes.
Yes, okay.
So we obviously have built into the tender process, and in particular the criteria, some aspects which are a little different to a normal employment tender, in that there's a heavy environment aspect to this program, but we're otherwise using the processes that would normally be used for those large tenders run by employment.
Okay, thank you. It comes to, now I want to come to how it's interacting particularly with Landcare and NRM groups, and how that's going to work, how that's going to work, who and the resources that will be provided to Landcare groups and NRM groups to be able to access the Green Army.
I'll ask Ms Lane to answer that, but I think I should state up front that we won't talk about this in terms of service providers, because the tender process is still quite active, and so it may be, and I actually don't know this, Senator, but it may be that natural resource management groups or Landcare are part of the tender process in terms of being the service providers. But in terms of, and I think your question though is around...
It goes more to the
projects.
projects. And I understand if they're service providers, it'll be a different answer. So I'm actually talking about projects and things.
Senator, so further to what Mr Sullivan has said, there is the option or the potential for NRM bodies and Landcare groups to participate in the Green Army program through putting forward projects, so essentially being the project sponsors, working with service providers to deliver a range of activities. We're in the middle of assessing those project applications at the moment, but there are a number of NRM bodies and Landcare groups who have put forward proposals.
Yep.
So obviously, depending on the quality of those projects, we would anticipate that there'd be a number of projects being delivered in cooperation with NRM groups and Landcare groups.
And what funding's available for the project proponents in terms of administration, training, provision and support?
This is not a typical grants program. The funding for the Green Army program is essentially channelled through the service providers through a procured arrangement with them. There's no funding that is exchanged between the department and the project sponsor. So the service provider will work with project sponsors to essentially support the project teams to deliver the activities. There is a component of the funding that we provide to service providers allocated to support project-specific materials, which will help the project sponsor in delivering the project, but that funding, again, is channeled through the service provider rather than a direct grant to the project sponsor.
So is it sort of like Employment Pathway Fund? There's an allocation of money to support projects.
The service providers, the costs that we're providing to the service providers are essentially to support the project teams, so they are to support the allowances for participants, the costs for transport, basic materials, training, costs other than the portion that I identified that would be provided for project specific materials. All other costs for the projects are provided by the project sponsor directly rather than through the Green Army program.
So when you say cost, you're talking about trees planted and things like that. So they've got to find that money from somewhere else, and then the Green Army just does the labour.
The Green Army program will support some costs for project-specific materials, an average of $10,000 per project, but other costs will be provided by the project sponsor. I guess in a similar way to our grant programs that we've run in the past, where the government doesn't typically provide the full cost of project activities.
Okay. So how much is available? How much from the project sponsors is being made available for that project support for the allowances that you talked about for the training, those sorts of...
So the average cost per project is $192,500. That's being provided to service providers for those things that I talked about earlier.
Per project, and out of that is not coming the payments for the people employed.
Yes, no, that includes the allowances.
That
includes the allowances.
Oh, when you said allowances, I thought you meant other allowances.
Oh, sorry,
beyond.
for that, that's the payment for the participants to participate.
192,000 all up,
per project.
depending,
on average.
and that's each project has 100 people.
10 people per project.
Over 6
So
months.
9 participants and a team supervisor.
10,
per
sorry, I beg your
project.
pardon. 10 per 6 months.
That's right.
Sorry, I was trying to compare it to the other figures I had before. 10, okay. When you said that people will be earning between $10 and $14 per hour, up to between $600 and $1,000 per fortnight, my understanding is that there's no guarantee that workers will be guaranteed a set number of hours. Is that correct, or is that...
Participants will be required to undertake project activities for up to 30 hours a week. There is a provision for part-time participation in the program, and the hours that we've specified for part-time participation is between 15 and 29 hours. So I guess the minimum is 15 hours, a maximum 30 hours per week.
And do project sponsors have to guarantee that they can provide either the 15 to 29 for part-time or the 30?
It's not the project sponsor's responsibility to provide the project team, so that will be one of the...
Service
that will
provider.
be the
Service provider
that does that.
has to guarantee that they will provide that amount of work?
They need to be able to provide teams of 10 for projects. There may be cases where teams have less than 10, and they will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, do the service providers have to guarantee the participants that they will provide 30 hours of work for those that aren't subject to the part-time exemptions?
So participants need to be engaged in activities that will fall up to 30 hours a week.
That doesn't
For
answer my
full-time
question.
Full-time participants need to be engaged for 30 hours per week.
So
Part-time's between 15 and 29 hours.
So whose obligation is it to find those 30 hours?
So the project proponents, when they put their proposals to us, are basically putting proposals to us which will include activities for a 26-week period to essentially keep project teams active for 30 hours a week over that time frame.
Yep. But
So
when I just asked you, you said that's not... My understanding of your answer was that in fact they didn't have to guarantee that. It was the service provider that was responsible for that.
That's right. So there are two streams of activity here. One is the project proposals will be submitted directly to the department by local councils, NRM groups and the like. In order for us to make a decision on what projects are recommended and passed to the service providers to deliver, one of the requirements will be that those projects need to be between 20 and 26 weeks long and need to be able to keep project teams active for that period.
But active, when you say active, the requirement for 30 hours a week, when you say active, so that
yes,
people can...
That's what we mean.
That's right.
We mean employing the participants for 30 hours. So what Ms Lane is saying is that we'll look at that as the department will look at that through the prism of the project proposal that we get, and that's something the sponsors are meant to indicate. And then on the service provider side, there are requirements for them to employ and engage the participants, if they're full-time, for 30 hours a week.
That's right.
I think your question, Senator, is what's stopping a service provider just saying, well, you're on for 10 hours this week and 15 hours next week.
Exactly.
And you can have 2 hours or 15 is the lower limit. But I want you for 30 next week.
Yeah.
Is that...
Yes.
So the service providers need to advise us of participants who are participating in the program on a part-time basis so that we can actually manage those issues. So the expectation is that most participants will be undertaking activities full-time. Part-time participation is is allowed on a case-by-case basis, and
All right.
service providers need to
Yeah.
discuss that with the department.
I understand that now that we... All right.
There may be circumstances, Senator, where participants who would get really good training opportunities from it and can actively contribute to, for a range of reasons, maybe a disability or it may be...
I understand that
Yeah.
it's not where people actually have
But you're
been
talking about the
provided
guarantee.
exemption.
Yeah,
It's the
okay.
guarantee that when people go into this, that they actually will get the 30 hours they're required to get.
Okay.
That's right.
Fair enough.
And in part, that goes to the sort of compliance that we run on the service
Yeah.
providers.
So you will be then running a compliance process?
There's
on the
a
service
range of
providers?
compliance measures that we'll have in place, including feedback from the participants themselves, which
Yeah.
we'll look at in terms of their level of satisfaction. Ms Lane might want to
Sorry,
elaborate.
I'll add to that. Sorry, Senator, now that I understand what you're asking. In addition, the service providers are required to enter into a participant agreement with each of the participants, which includes things
Okay.
like
The 30 hours.
what they're expected to do in the project, including their training plan. And so I guess what Mr Thompson's alluding to there is if there are instances where participants are not provided with what that participant agreement outlines, then there are mechanisms to follow that up.
Okay, thank you. I've got some more questions. I'm running out of time. I'll put them on notice. I have one more question unrelated to this, and that's about IPAs. Is this still here or is it in PM&C?
So IPAs are funded and will continue to be funded from the Natural Heritage Trust,
Yeah.
but they're being delivered on our behalf by PM&C.
Okay, so I'll ask there on Friday. Thank you.
Thanks. Senator Waters or Wright?
No, Senator Waters, and then I'll have a few questions
Okay.
as well, Chair.
Okay, Senator Waters.
Thanks, Chair. Hi again, folks.